Hello, and welcome to the 2025 Farm Stand Rulemaking Advisory Committee. So I'm Hilary Foote. I'm the current Farm and Forest Land Use Specialist for the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And I am one of the agency staff who will be providing support for this rulemaking effort. So first of all, thank you for volunteering your time to serve on this RAC. We recognize that you are all very busy humans. Your time is a gift, and we do hope to use it efficiently. So this video is intended as an introduction for RAC members so that when we meet as a group at our first meeting, we can jump right into discussion on the topics that LCDC or the Land Conservation and Development Commission has asked us to consider. So today I'm going to be going over what we are asking of you as a member of our RAC, the schedule, opportunities for communicating with the agency outside of our scheduled RAC meetings, and we'll also be reviewing LCDC's charge for this RAC and going over background information on the farm stand topic generally that we'll be discussing together. So if you're watching this video, it's likely because you received the introductory materials packet with a link to it. And I briefly want to touch on some of the other content that was contained in that packet. So the first item in your materials packet is the RAC Operating Guidelines, or Charter, which is essentially our contractor agreement for how we will interact as a group as we consider the charge given to us by LCDC. The operating guidelines include expectations for participation by members, like attending meetings, reviewing the materials prior to the meetings, and productively sharing your concerns and ideas. The operating guidelines also outline the types of support you can expect from staff during the process, like the preparation of meeting summaries. That operating guidelines document also includes the rulemaking charge provided by LCDC. So a rulemaking charge is a description of what it is exactly that the Commission has asked us to do. And we're going to go over that in more detail a little bit later on in this video. In the materials packet, there is also a link to another video that provides a broader, more general overview of what it means to serve on a RAC. And that video uncovers important aspects of public meetings law and touches on most of the operating principles and guidelines for participation in a RAC that are outlined in our charter as well. So please do read over the operating guidelines document, watch the other video, and feel free to contact me by phone or email if you have any questions or concerns about those agreements. And lastly, you will also find that the packet contains a background paper on farm stands. And that backgrounder includes a link to decisions from the Court of Appeals and the Land Use Board of Appeals, or LUBA, as it's referred to, on a case in Multnomah County that involved a farm stand that provides some very useful legislative history behind the farm stand use that may be of interest for folks involved in this discussion. So throughout this rulemaking process, additional materials will be generated. And it'll include things like suggested rule language, meeting summaries, public comment provided to the RAC, and written comments provided by the RAC members themselves. So the department will be updating the rulemaking webpage throughout that process with materials and schedule adjustments. So you may want to bookmark this webpage for future reference. The URL for that page is shown here in the yellow box on the lower left. All of DLCD's recent and open rulemakings are listed on this page. So you can find information on this rulemaking, the farm stands rulemaking, by scrolling down to the section titled Open for Public Review and Comment. And then under Proposed Rules, you will find the section for farm stands. So now I'd like to take a moment to review the timeline and key steps in the rulemaking process for the next several months. And we're going to be revisiting these several times over. So our RAC is going to be meeting 4 times between mid-May and mid-July. And we are scheduling 3 hours for each of those meetings, which will include a small mid-meeting break. Those meetings are colored in green on this timeline here. So during the May and the 2 June meetings, we will be asking our RAC to discuss 5 topic areas that were identified by the Legislative Agritourism Work Group that met this past February. So we'll be talking about those in a little bit more detail in just a moment. At our July meeting, we will ask you to review a draft rule proposal and to comment on the fiscal impacts and housing impacts of that rulemaking. So department staff will be considering all of your suggestions that we collect throughout these RAC meetings and all of the comments that are provided in writing as well. And after the last June meeting, agency staff will draft proposed rule revisions. And we will review those proposed rule revisions with you at our July RAC meeting. Following the July RAC meeting, and based on any comment and discussion we have then, we will make any needed adjustments. And then in August, the proposal will go through an internal agency review process, and that includes review by the Department of Justice, which is essentially counsel for the agency. In early September, likely the first week of September, the Secretary of State will issue a formal public notice of rulemaking. And that notice of rulemaking will contain the agency's rule proposal, and that is the rulemaking proposal that will be considered by LCDC. So just a note, it would be ideal if our RAC comes to a place where we all agree, but that doesn't necessarily need to happen. So if there are comments or perspectives from this RAC that we choose not to integrate into the agency rule proposal, we will note that in our staff report to LCDC for the September hearing. And at the September hearing, LCDC will hear public testimony. They will consider the proposed rule changes. And at that time, you will also have an opportunity to provide additional comment or perspective to LCDC directly as a member of the public through that LCDC hearings process. The RAC may also meet for a 5th time following the LCDC September hearing, if there is a need to. And that would be determined after the September Commission hearing on the rulemaking. Then it is also very important to note that the public comment period for the rulemaking is scheduled to close on October 5th. So comments may be provided to LCDC at any time and at any point up until 11:55 p.m. on October 5th. After October 5th, no additional public comment will be taken. And then the final adoption hearing for this rulemaking is currently scheduled for the October LCDC meeting, which will occur in late October. So again, we'll be revisiting the schedule several times, over our rulemaking meetings. But if you have any questions about the schedule or expectations for steps in the process, please feel free to reach out to me. So we have 20 members who have volunteered to serve on this RAC for the farm stand rulemaking. A number of the RAC members are rural planning professionals who work with the existing rules on a daily basis at the planning counter, where they are responsible for explaining these rules to potential applicants and other rural residents. And it is often these planners who are writing findings addressing the rule provisions. So we're very excited to have that perspective on the RAC. On our RAC, we also have a number of farmers who own land protected under exclusive farm use zoning, who understand what it is to operate a farm business and a farm stand under the current regulatory structures. And so we are hoping that they can share their perspective on what it is like to operate their businesses. We have members on this RAC who support the farm, forest, and woodlot industries in a variety of ways as advocates, as industry representatives. And we have a few folks who work with development interests and bring a different perspective to the conversation. It is important to note that about a third of the members on the RAC previously served on the Legislative Agritourism Work Group that met in February of this year, and have already, sort of begun on a conversation on this topic. So this is an important point. So many of the members on the RAC have been involved in discussions around exclusive farm use zones, agricultural land productives, Gold 3 for several decades, and some have written articles or papers on the topic. And many of our RAC members may not be as practiced or as comfortable sharing their views on these issues. So all of you were invited to participate in this RAC because we do want to hear your viewpoint. We have contracted a professional facilitator, Donna Silverberg, to moderate these discussions in a way that provides the whole group space to hear all perspectives. If, however, you just don't feel comfortable sharing with the group or something occurs to you after the meeting, as often happens, we do want to collect those thoughts. So I will encourage you to email me with your thoughts directly at any point through this process. And when you do that, I will share those written comments along with any other public comment that we receive during this phase with the RAC between the meetings. So same goes if you missed a meeting. So we encourage you to try to make all meetings. However, particularly with farmers on this RAC, we understand that things happen and things come up. So if you do happen to miss a meeting, I'm going to encourage you to watch the meeting recordings, consider the content, and email me your thoughts and perspectives. Please, however, do not email or CC other members of the RAC. So you are not going to be given email addresses of other members, but many of you know each other. And in this day and age, it isn't hard to dig up contact information. However, we will run afoul of public meetings law if you start emailing each other. So please do send your thoughts to me directly and don't CC other RAC members. All right. So a little bit on the charge or the direction. So again, a charge for rulemaking is a description of the task that has been assigned to us by the Land Conservation and Development Commission, or LCDC. The current charge for the farm stands rulemaking is fairly broad. It involves considering farm stands. And there is an expectation that we will be addressing 5 topic areas that were identified by the 2025 Legislative Agritourism Work Group. So I'll just go through each of these topic areas very briefly, just orient you to some points in the discussion. So the first topic that we'll be discussing is what you might call a primary use test. So questions related to this topic could be, is farming required to be a primary activity on the property hosting a farm stand? And if it is, how do you ensure that farming remains the primary activity or the focus of the property, of the operation, rather than retail sales and events? The second conversation will be around activities that promote the sale of farm products, the farm operation, or agriculture. So questions related to this topic could be, what types of promotional events and activities may be authorized in conjunction with a farm stand? So one thing I would like to add here is that there are other opportunities in statute to permit events. So one of those opportunities is the agritourism and other commercial events use. It doesn't need to be in conjunction with a farm stand. That is a different permitting pathway. So what we're talking about here really is limited to those events or promotional activities that are permitted in conjunction with a farm stand to promote those products. The third topic of discussion is somewhat related to that. Promotional activities outside or inside farm stand structures. Under current law, farm stands may not include structures for banquets, public gatherings, or public entertainment. So the question here is, where on the property should promotional events be occurring? The fourth discussion concerns the topic of prepared foods. So a question related to this topic could be, what are prepared foods as opposed to a menu service? To what extent may prepared foods and beverages be offered at a farm stand? What ties do those prepared foods have to the farm operation or to farms in the local agricultural area? And then lastly, we will discuss impacts on neighboring farms. So the question here may be, should impacts to neighboring farms or forest operations from that farm stand be considered as part of the permitting review process? And I'll touch on that a little bit more in just a second. So in order to support these discussions, it's going to be helpful to know a little bit about the background of the farm stand statute itself. So I'm going to encourage everyone to read the backgrounder paper that was included with the packet. And there are a couple of important things to keep in mind about exclusive farm use zones and this particular use as we move through these conversations. So land that is zoned for exclusive farm use is protected under Goal 3. It is protected for agricultural use. Farming is an allowed use in farm zones, and only uses listed in statute can be approved in exclusive farm use zones. Those uses other than farming that are allowed are determined by the legislature and listed in statute in one of two lists. And one permitted use that is on the first list is a farm stand that sells locally grown crops or livestock. The current statutory language for farm stands is copied on the slide here. So permitted farm stands can also sell some related retail items and host events to promote its products. However, income from events and retail sales cannot exceed 25% of the farm stand's total gross earnings. So those are the current statutory requirements. Every county in Oregon must allow farm stands under these standards, and they cannot impose more restrictive limitations on farm stands. Because farm stands are what planners refer to as a sub 1 use, it's in that first list in statute, there is an assumption that a farm stand permitted under these standards is inherently compatible with farm operations that are occurring in the surrounding area and forest operations that might be occurring in the surrounding area. So an applicant for a farm stand does not have to demonstrate that they will not have a negative impact on their neighbors as a part of the permitting process. So that farm impacts test or good neighbor test is applied to what are referred to as sub 2 uses. It is not applied to a farm stand. So a really important point, our rulemaking will look at clarifying aspects of this existing statutory language. The Land Conservation and Development Commission has the authority to interpret and clarify statutes enacted by the legislature, but we cannot change the statutory requirements themselves or contradict statute with our rules. To change the statute, that takes an act of the legislature. So what we do with the rulemaking will be clarifying these statutory provisions, but it will be limited by the standards that the legislature has established here. Okay. So in closing today, again, I really do want to thank you for volunteering your time and providing your thoughts on these topics. When we meet next week, we're going to move fairly quickly into our first discussion. So if you have any questions about expectations, process, topics, please don't hesitate to reach out to me via email or to give me a call. My contact information is listed here in the top left corner. It's on the rulemaking webpage. It's on the Farm Forest webpage. And email is usually the quickest way to get a response from me. If you have more technical questions about the Zoom links, about the website, about YouTube, go ahead and reach out to Silas for administrative support. His contact information is listed here, and it's also going to be on the project webpage. Lastly, for support, Casaria Taylor can provide feedback on process expectations, and she will manage comments that are directed at LCDC, the Land Conservation and Development Commission. So I am very excited for the discussions and am looking forward to working with all of you over the coming months, and we will see you next week. Thank you.